Colorado Territory, 1873. The midnight wind whistled through the gaps in Reece Daniels' cabin walls, carrying the first hint of autumn's chill across the rolling plains. At 26, Reece had already seen enough of the West's brutality to last several lifetimes. Tonight, like most nights, he sat alone by dying embers, cleaning his Colt revolver, his most reliable companion in these untamed lands. His modest homestead lay nestled in a small valley 15 miles outside Silverton, far enough from civilization to avoid entanglements but close enough to trade when necessary. The isolation suited him. After losing his family to a cholera outbreak back east and witnessing the savagery of the war, Reece had constructed his life around a simple truth. Attachment was merely an invitation to pain. The frontier was no place for softness or sentiment, only survival mattered here. The floorboards beneath his worn boots had been salvaged from an abandoned stagecoach station. Everything in his life served a purpose: practicality. Utility, survival. The cabin walls were adorned only with necessary tools, no decorations, no comforts, nothing to suggest permanence or home. Even his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Scout, was valued primarily for its reliability rather than companionship. Reece rubbed his clean-shaven jaw, feeling the day's light stubble beneath his fingertips. Despite years of hard living, his face retained a youthfulness that often surprised those who encountered him on the trail. His eyes, however, told a different story, green as spring grass but hardened by experiences no young man should endure. "No sense in pretending," he muttered to the empty room, sliding the reassembled revolver into its holster. "You build something out here, someone or something takes it away." The howl of a distant wolf seemed to punctuate his conviction. Reece tossed another log onto the fire and watched the flames reluctantly claim it. In 2 days he would ride into Silverton for supplies, endure whatever minimal human contact was required, then retreat back to his sanctuary of solitude. His future stretched before him like the endless Colorado prairie, vast, predictable, and deliberately empty. Just as he preferred it, a sharp, urgent knocking at his door shattered the midnight silence. Reece's hand instinctively moved to his holstered Colt. Nobody visited at midnight with good intentions, not in this territory. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the fireplace glow. The knocking came again, 3 rapid taps followed by silence. Moving with practiced stealth, Reece positioned himself beside the door, gun drawn. "State your business," he called, his voice carrying the edge of a man who'd faced midnight callers before. "Please," came the response, a woman's voice strained with desperation. "I need help." Something in her tone, raw vulnerability rather than deception, gave him pause. Still, Reece had witnessed clever traps before. "Move 10 paces back from the door," he instructed. "Keep your hands visible." After counting to 5, Reece unlatched the door and pulled it open in one swift motion, revolver raised. Standing in the pale moonlight was a young woman, perhaps 22, her face streaked with dirt and what appeared to be dried tears. Golden blonde hair escaped from beneath a battered bonnet, and her once fine blue calico dress was torn and mud-spattered. Despite her disheveled appearance, her striking beauty was unmistakable, with delicate features and eyes the color of cornflowers. But it was what she clutched protectively against her chest that captured Reece's attention, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, held with the fierce protectiveness of someone guarding their most precious possession. "Please," she whispered, those blue eyes holding his with surprising steadiness for someone so clearly distressed. "They'll kill us both if they find us." Before Reece could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats carried on the night wind. The woman's eyes widened in terror. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Reece stepped aside. "Get in."
"Quick."
She hurried past him, the scent of wildflowers somehow lingering despite her evident ordeal. Reece secured the door, then moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the shutters. "Who's following you?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "Men who work for Victor Ramsey," she replied, clutching the bundle tighter. "3 of them, they've been tracking me since Cedar Creek."
Reece's jaw tightened.
Ramsey was a cattle baron whose reach extended throughout the territory, a man who considered law a mere inconvenience to be navigated or ignored. "What's your name?" he asked, still watching for movement outside. "Nora." "Nora Summers," her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but carried a core of determination. "And what's in the bundle that's worth Ramsey sending men after you?" The woman Nora hesitated, then slowly unwrapped the cloth bundle. Nestled within was a leather-bound ledger and a small stack of papers secured with twine. "Evidence," she said, "of everything he's done: land swindles, bribing officials, ordering killings dressed up as accidents. Her eyes met his. "Including what happened to my father." The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. Reece motioned for silence, his finger to his lips. Through the window, he could make out 3 riders approaching his property, their silhouettes dark against the moonlit landscape. "Does anyone know you came this way?" he whispered. She shook her head. "I don't think so. I crossed the creek several times to break the trail."
Reece considered his options.
His solitary existence had just collided with exactly the kind of complication he'd built his life to avoid. Everything in him screamed to send her back into the night. Her troubles were not his burden. And yet. "Hide in there," he said, pointing to a small storage room off the kitchen. Not a sound. Nora clutched the bundle to her chest and slipped into the darkened room. Reece quickly rearranged his chair and placed a half-empty whiskey bottle on the table, making it appear as if he'd fallen asleep while drinking. Then he disheveled his hair, untucked his shirt, and opened the door just as the first knock landed. "What in tarnation?" he growled, feigning irritation and the slight slur of interrupted sleep.
"Do you know what time it is?"
3 men sat atop their horses. The leader, a hawk-faced man with a scar running from temple to jaw, leaned forward. "Apologies for the late hour," he said, his politeness at odds with the cold calculation in his eyes. "We're looking for a young woman. Blonde hair, blue dress, might have passed this way." Reece leaned against the doorframe, projecting annoyed indifference. "Haven't seen nobody. Been drinking and dozing since sundown."
The scarred man studied him.
"Mind if we look around your property? She's stolen something valuable from our employer." "I mind considerably," Reece replied, straightening to his full height. "This is private land. Unless you've got a warrant or a badge, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere." The men exchanged glances. The scarred leader's hand drifted toward his holster. "Now, friend," he said, "no need to make this difficult, mister. Ramsey rewards cooperation generously." Reece's expression hardened as his right hand casually rested near his holster. "And I value my privacy immensely. You boys are welcome to ride on, or we can see whose aim is truer."
"Your choice."
For a tense moment, the night air crackled with unspoken threats. Then the scarred man's mouth twisted into something approaching a smile. "We'll continue our search elsewhere, for now." He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Good evening." Reece remained in the doorway, watching as they rode away, their forms gradually swallowed by darkness. Only when the hoofbeats had faded entirely did he close the door and secure it. "They're gone," he called softly toward the storage room, "for now." Nora emerged, her face pale in the firelight. "Thank you," she said, clutching the bundle. "They would have killed me." Reece moved to the window again, scanning the darkness. "They'll be back, likely with more men. Ramsey doesn't give up easily." He turned to face her. "You picked a dangerous enemy." "I didn't choose this fight," she replied, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "But I won't run from it either. My father was a judge in Denver. He was investigating Ramsey's operations when he died in what everyone called a tragic accident." Her voice caught. "I found these documents hidden in his study."
"They prove Ramsey ordered his killing."
Reece studied her. Despite her bedraggled appearance, there was something undeniably resolute in her bearing, a strength that belied her delicate features. "What's your plan?" he asked.
"Those papers won't matter if you're dead."
"I need to reach Federal Marshal Hollister in Durango. He worked with my father years ago. I trust him." She hesitated. "I just need safe passage there."
Reece ran a hand through his hair.
Everything he'd built, his carefully constructed isolation, his uncomplicated existence, was being threatened by this woman and her dangerous documents. "You should get some rest," he said finally. "You can take my bed."
"I'll keep watch." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you, mister."
"Daniels, Reece Daniels," he gestured toward the small bedroom. "We'll figure out next steps come morning." When she had gone, Reece settled into his chair by the window, revolver at hand. Bringing this woman to Durango meant at least 3 days' travel through open country with Ramsey's men in pursuit. It meant risk, involvement, everything he'd sworn to avoid. Yet as he kept his vigil through the remaining hours of darkness, something long dormant stirred within him. A sense that perhaps his self-imposed isolation wasn't protection, but a different kind of prison. Dawn broke with the promise of clear skies. Reece had dozed intermittently, always keeping one ear alert for trouble. He kindled the fire and set coffee to boil, the familiar routine offering some semblance of normalcy in what had become a decidedly abnormal situation. The bedroom door opened and Nora emerged. She had clearly made efforts to improve her appearance, Her golden hair was neatly braided, her face washed clean of dirt, though nothing could be done about her torn dress. "Good morning," she said, hesitating at the threshold. Reece nodded, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Hungry." "Starving," she admitted. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." He placed bacon in a skillet and sliced bread from a loaf. As he worked, he could feel her watching him. "How long have you lived out here alone?" she asked finally. 3 years. He kept his attention on the food, prefer it that way. "No family. Not anymore." Something in his tone must have communicated that further questions were unwelcome, because she fell silent. When the food was ready, they ate without speaking, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and distant morning birds. "I can't stay," Nora said finally, setting down her empty cup. "Those men will return, probably with reinforcements." "I know," Reece replied. He'd been turning over their limited options all night. "We leave within the hour, pack only what's essential for 3 days hard riding." Her eyes widened. "Away?" He met her gaze steadily. "You won't make it to Durango alone, not with Ramsey's men hunting you." "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" It was a fair question, one he'd asked himself repeatedly during the night. "Let's just say I've seen enough men like Ramsey get away with murder." He stood, effectively ending the conversation. "I'll saddle the horses." Outside, as Reece prepared his buckskin and an older mare he kept as a pack animal, he questioned his own judgment. This woman's crusade wasn't his fight. Yet something in her determination to see justice done resonated with a part of himself he'd long suppressed. When Nora joined him, she wore a borrowed canvas jacket over her dress, making her look even smaller within its folds. The precious bundle was secured inside a saddlebag. "We'll avoid the main trails," Reece explained, helping her mount the mare. "First water is about 6 hours west. If we push hard, we can reach the foothills by nightfall." As they rode away from the cabin, Reece felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the open terrain. For years he'd maintained his isolation like armor. Now, with this woman and her dangerous documents in his care, that armor had developed a significant crack. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, keeping to sheltered draws and wooded areas where possible. Reece maintained a vigilant watch, frequently studying their back trail for signs of pursuit. "You're good at this," Nora observed during a brief rest to water the horses, moving unseen. Reece shrugged. "Spent time scouting during the war, old habits." "Which side?" "Union," he replied shortly, adjusting his saddle. "Doesn't much matter now." "It matters," she said quietly. "Everything that shapes us matters." He looked at her then, really looked. Despite her refined speech and delicate appearance, there was a resilience in her eyes that spoke of someone acquainted with hardship. "What about you?" he asked. "How does a judge's daughter end up fleeing across Colorado with stolen documents?" Nora stroked her mare's neck thoughtfully. "My father raised me after my mother died. He believed in justice, the real kind, not what money can buy." Her voice hardened. "After he died, everyone said I should accept the official finding of accidental death. Return to Boston, find a suitable husband, live a proper life." "But you didn't." A small, fierce smile played at her lips. "I was never particularly good at doing what I was told." Something unexpectedly warm unfurled in Reece's chest, admiration perhaps or recognition of a kindred stubbornness. "We should move," he said, swinging back into the saddle. "Still a lot of ground to cover." By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered along the western horizon. Reece studied them with concern. "Storm's coming," he said. "We need to find shelter before it hits." "There's nothing out here," Nora observed, glancing at the rolling prairie surrounding them. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead, used it once during a cattle drive." They reached the abandoned herder's shack just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, with a small stone fireplace and a crude wooden platform for sleeping, but it was shelter. Reece quickly unsaddled the horses and secured them beneath a lean-to attached to the back of the structure. Inside, he worked efficiently to start a fire while Nora brushed dust from her clothes. "We'll wait out the storm here," he said, arranging kindling in the fireplace. "Too dangerous to travel in open country during lightning." The storm arrived with dramatic intensity, sheets of rain lashing against the small windows, thunder cracking overhead. The shack's roof leaked in several places, requiring strategic placement of their few containers to catch the drips. In the close quarters of the tiny shelter, Reece became acutely aware of Nora in ways he hadn't while riding. The gentle curve of her neck as she leaned forward to warm her hands, the way stray wisps of golden hair curled against her temple, the surprising grace with which she moved in this rustic environment so different from her upbringing. "You mentioned your mother died," he said abruptly, needing conversation to distract from his awareness of her. "How old were you?" 12, she replied, looking up with slight surprise at his question. Influenza. My father never remarried, though half the widows in Denver set their caps for him. A fond smile touched her lips. He used to say no one could replace his Northern Star. Northern Star. It was his name for her, Nora Summers. He said she always helped him find true north. The simple poetry of it caught Reece off guard. My parents had something similar, he found himself saying. 26 years together before cholera took them both within days of each other. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Reece shrugged, uncomfortable with the sympathy in her eyes. It was years ago. "Loss doesn't operate on a timetable," Nora observed. "My father always said grief is just love with nowhere to go." The unexpected wisdom struck Reece silent. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the shack something subtle had shifted. A connection, tenuous but undeniable, had formed between them. As evening approached, they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. The storm showed no signs of abating. "We'll need to share the sleeping platform," Reece said matter-of-factly, though the prospect unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "I'll keep to my side." Nora nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Of course. Later, as they lay side by side in the darkness, separated by Reece's saddle blanket as an improvised barrier, he found sleep elusive. The sound of her breathing, the subtle warmth radiating from her form, the lingering scent of wildflowers despite their day's travel, all conspired to keep him acutely conscious. "Reece," her whisper barely carried above the rain. "Are you awake?" "Yes." A pause, then. "Why did you really agree to help me? The truth." "The darkness made it easier to speak." "My brother was killed by a man like Ramsey. Land dispute in Nebraska territory. Local law wouldn't touch him, too much money, too much influence." He exhaled slowly. "I tried to find justice through proper channels." "Failed? What happened?" "I found my own justice," he said flatly, "left that life behind afterward." Nora was silent for so long that Reece thought she might have fallen asleep. Then her hand found his across the blanket barrier, her fingers warm and surprisingly strong as they curled around his. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly, "and for helping me find my justice the right way." Reece didn't pull his hand away, though every instinct warned him against this small intimacy. "Get some sleep, Nora. Tomorrow will be a hard ride." Her hand remained in his until sleep finally claimed them both. Dawn brought clearing skies but treacherous, muddy conditions. They departed the shack early, Reece setting a careful pace to avoid taxing the horses in the sodden terrain. "We'll reach Canyon Creek by midday," he explained as they rode. "Have to cross before continuing to Durango." "Is that dangerous after the rain?" "Could be," he admitted. "We'll assess when we get there." The morning passed uneventfully, though Reece's vigilance never wavered. By noon, they reached the creek, normally a manageable crossing but now swollen to twice its usual width, brown water rushing with alarming force. Reece dismounted to study the situation. "We'll need to find a narrower point," he said, scanning the creek in both directions. "What about there?" Nora pointed to a spot several hundred yards upstream where the creek narrowed between rocky outcroppings. Reece nodded appreciatively at her observation. "Good eye." They led their horses carefully along the creek bank until reaching the narrower section. Even here, the crossing looked daunting, fast-moving water that would reach the horses' bellies at minimum. "I'll go first," Reece said. "Watch my line. If I make it across safely, follow exactly my path." He mounted Scout and urged the buckskin into the rushing water. The horse moved forward reluctantly but steadily, finding secure footing on the submerged riverbed. Halfway across, Scout stumbled momentarily on a hidden obstacle, and Reece's heart lurched as cold water splashed up to his thighs. But the sure-footed animal recovered and continued forward, reaching the opposite bank with a final surge of effort. Reece turned in his saddle, waving for Nora to follow. She guided her mare into the water with surprising confidence, maintaining the exact line Reece had taken. The older mare was more hesitant than Scout, stopping several times to test the footing before proceeding. Two-thirds of the way across, disaster struck. The mare stepped into a hidden depression, stumbling badly. Nora fought to keep her seat as the horse thrashed in the deeper water, panicking. "Hold on," Reece shouted, already urging Scout back into the creek. The mare regained her footing momentarily, then lost it again as the current pushed against her. Nora slid sideways in the saddle. In one horrifying moment, she tumbled into the rushing water with a startled cry. Reece drove Scout directly toward her, leaning dangerously from the saddle as Nora surfaced, gasping. Her hands flailed, seeking purchase in the churning current. "Grab my hand," he called, extending his arm as far as possible without falling. Their fingers touched, slipped apart, then connected again, more firmly this time. With a tremendous effort, Reece hauled her from the water and across his saddle. Nora clung to him, coughing and shivering as Scout struggled back to the bank. On solid ground, Reece lowered her gently, his heart hammering with residual fear. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, water streaming from her sodden hair and clothes. "The documents," she gasped. "The saddlebag." Reece looked back to see the mare had made it across, though the saddlebag hung precariously, partially torn from its fastenings. He hurried to secure it, checking the precious contents. "They're wet but intact," he reported, returning to Nora's side. "We need to get you warm and dry before hypothermia sets in." A quick survey of their surroundings revealed a small cave-like overhang in the nearby rocks, not ideal, but sufficient shelter to build a fire and dry out. Within minutes, Reece had a small blaze going. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said practically, though the suggestion sent unexpected heat to his face. "Take my spare shirt and trousers. They'll be too large, but they're dry." He turned his back as Nora changed, focusing intently on spreading the important documents near the fire to dry without burning. "You can turn around now," she said after several minutes. Reece did so and immediately wished he hadn't. The sight of Nora in his clothing affected him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The blue cotton shirt hung past her hips, the sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands. The trousers were secured with one of his belts cinched to the tightest notch. Despite the comical proportions, she somehow looked both vulnerable and strikingly beautiful. "Thank you," she said softly. "For saving my life." Reece nodded, not trusting his voice. He busied himself laying out her dress and undergarments to dry, maintaining a deliberate distance between them. "You could have drowned coming back for me," Nora continued, settling beside the fire. "Most men wouldn't have risked it." "I'm not most men," he replied simply. "No," she agreed, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "You certainly are not." Something in her tone made him look up, meeting her gaze across the small fire. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken awareness. Reece cleared his throat. "We should stay here until your clothes are dry." "Might mean camping overnights." "I don't mind," she said, still holding his gaze. "I feel safe with you." The simple statement affected him more profoundly than any flowery declaration could have. For years, Reece had defined himself by his capacity for violence, for survival. To be seen as a source of safety rather than danger was disarming. They passed the afternoon in companionable conversation as Nora's clothes slowly dried. She spoke of her childhood in Denver, her father's dedication to justice, her own brief time studying law under his guidance, highly unusual for a woman. In return, Reece found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. Memories of his family's farm in Pennsylvania, his brother's dreams of Western expansion, the devastating aftermath of losing everyone he loved. "Is that why you live alone?" Nora asked. "Because of what happened to your family." Reece poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "Partly. Also learned during the war that attachments are liabilities out here. You care about someone, you give fate a target." "That's a lonely philosophy," she observed. "It's a practical one," he countered. "The West doesn't reward sentimentality." Nora wrapped her arms around her knees. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it's precisely what the West needs more of, people willing to care despite the risks." As twilight descended, they shared the last of their provisions. With her clothes now dry, Nora retreated behind a rock outcropping to change, returning in her blue calico dress that somehow looked more appropriate on her than his oversized clothing had. Reece spread his bedroll near the fire and offered it to her. "Take it, I'll keep watch." "You haven't slept properly in 2 days," she protested. "We can share it like in the shack." The memory of her hand in his during the storm made his pulse quicken. "That's not necessary."
I insist, she said with surprising firmness. We both need rest if we're to reach Durango tomorrow. Reluctantly he agreed. They lay side by side beneath the stars, the fire crackling nearby. This time no saddle blanket separated them. Tell me something, Nora said into the darkness. What will you do after we reach Durango, after this is over? The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought beyond their immediate goal. Return to my cabin, I suppose. Continue as before. Alone. Something in her voice made his chest tighten. It's what I know. Nora was silent for a long moment. What if there could be something else, something more than survival? Reece turned his head to look at her, finding her already watching him, her expression earnest in the firelight. Nora, he began, uncertain what he even wanted to say. She shifted slightly, closing the small distance between them and pressed her lips gently to his. The contact was brief, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When she pulled away, Reece remained frozen, a tumult of emotions warring within him. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to feel anything beyond the necessities of survival that the rush of desire and tenderness threatened to overwhelm him. I apologize if I misunderstood, Nora whispered, misinterpreting his stillness. In answer, Reece reached for her, drawing her back to him. Their second kiss deepened, years of self-imposed isolation crumbling beneath the simple human connection he'd denied himself for so long. When they finally parted, breathless, Reece touched her cheek with a gentleness that surprised even him. We should rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be challenging. Nora nodded, settling against him with her head on his shoulder. Good night, Reece. As she drifted to sleep in his arms, Reece remained awake, staring at the stars. The woman beside him had upended everything he believed about his place in this harsh territory. And for the first time in years, he found himself considering a future beyond mere survival. Dawn broke cold and clear. They packed efficiently, both slightly awkward in the morning light after the intimacy they'd shared. The documents, now dry, were carefully rewrapped and secured in the repaired saddlebag. If we push hard, we can reach Durango by sunset, Reece said as they mounted. Stay alert. We're still in danger until those papers reach the marshal. They rode steadily through the morning, the terrain gradually transitioning from rolling prairie to the foothills of the San Juan Mountains. The landscape offered more cover but also more places for potential ambush, keeping Reece's senses sharp. Around midday, as they paused in a small grove of aspens to rest the horses, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. Bark exploded from a tree inches from Nora's head. Down, Reece shouted, diving from his saddle and pulling her with him. They tumbled behind a fallen log as another shot kicked up dirt where they had been standing. The horses bolted at the gunfire, though thankfully not far, stopping nervously at the edge of the grove. Ramsey's men, Reece whispered, drawing his Colt, must have picked up our trail after the storm. How many? Nora asked, admirably composed despite the danger. Reece cautiously peered around the log, scanning the surrounding hills. At least 3, maybe more, positioned on that ridge. He pointed to a rocky outcropping about 200 yards away. Another shot struck their protective log, sending splinters flying. They're trying to pin us down, Reece explained, probably waiting for reinforcements. What do we do? Reece assessed their limited options. The aspen grove provided some cover, but they were effectively trapped unless they could reach the horses. I'll create a diversion, he decided. When I draw their fire, you run for the horses, head southwest through that ravine. It leads toward Durango. Nora gripped his arm. I won't leave you behind. This isn't a discussion, he said firmly. Those documents are what matters. Getting them to Marshal Hollister is the priority. You matter too, she insisted, her blue eyes fierce with emotion. I'm not leaving without you. Before Reece could argue further, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. His heart sank, thinking Ramsey's reinforcements had arrived. Instead, a voice called out, Reece Daniels. That you taking fire down there? Relief flooded him as he recognized the voice. Sheriff Burke, he shouted back, northeast ridge, at least 3 gunmen. Moments later, the sharp exchange of gunfire erupted from the direction of the ridge. Reece seized the opportunity, grabbing Nora's hand. Now, run for the horses. They sprinted across the clearing, bullets kicking up dirt around them. Reaching the nervous animals, they mounted quickly and galloped away from the firefight, heading southwest as Reece had planned. Only when they'd put considerable distance between themselves and the ambush did Reece slow their pace, allowing the winded horses to recover. Who was that? Nora asked, looking back over her shoulder. The sheriff. Tom Burke, Reece confirmed. Sheriff of Silverton, good man, must have been trailing Ramsey's men when he found us. Will he be all right? Burke can handle himself and he'll have deputies with him. Reece surveyed their surroundings. We still need to reach Durango before nightfall. Ramsey has influence throughout this territory. They continued southward at a steady pace, both vigilant for further pursuit. The afternoon sun beat down on them as they navigated increasingly mountainous terrain. How did you come to know the sheriff? Nora asked as they rode side by side along a narrow trail. Helped him track some horse thieves last spring, Reece replied. He's one of the few lawmen I trust out here. One of the few people you trust at all, I'd wager, she observed with gentle insight. Reece glanced at her, struck again by her perceptiveness. Trust is earned hard in these parts. And have I earned it? She asked quietly. The question deserved honest consideration. This woman had upended his carefully constructed solitude, placed him in mortal danger, awakened feelings he'd buried years ago, and somehow improbably he felt more alive than he had in memory. Yes, he said finally, you have. Her smile in response warmed something deep within him. Late afternoon brought Durango into view, a growing settlement nestled in the valley, its buildings clustered along the Animas River. Smoke rose from chimneys and the distant sound of a train whistle carried on the breeze. We made it, Nora breathed, relief evident in her voice. Not quite yet, Reece cautioned. We need to reach the marshal's office without being seen. They approached town from the north, avoiding the main street. Reece knew Durango well enough to navigate its back alleys, bringing them to the modest building that housed the federal marshal's office as the sun dipped toward the western mountains. Wait here, he instructed, helping Nora dismount in the shadowed alley behind the building. I'll make sure Hollister is inside and alone. The marshal's office was quiet, occupied only by a gray-haired man with a weathered face and sharp eyes that missed nothing as Reece entered. Daniels, he acknowledged with a nod, been a while. Marshal Hollister, Reece returned the greeting. I have someone outside who needs your help, Judge Summers' daughter. Recognition flashed in the older man's eyes. Edward's girl. Bring her in, quick. Minutes later, Nora was seated across from Marshal Hollister, the precious documents spread across his desk. The marshal examined them with growing gravity, occasionally asking sharp questions about their provenance. This is damning evidence, he said finally, looking up at Nora. Your father would be proud of what you've done bringing this to light. Can you act on it? She asked anxiously. Will it be enough? Hollister nodded, gathering the papers carefully. More than enough for federal charges. I'll telegraph the district attorney tonight. Ramsey's reign is over. He fixed Nora with a serious look. But you're still in danger until he's in custody. She'll stay with me, Reece said, surprising himself with the declaration. At the hotel until this is resolved. Hollister raised an eyebrow but nodded. I'll post a deputy outside your room. With luck, we'll have Ramsey in custody within days. As they left the marshal's office through the back entrance, twilight had settled over Durango. Reece led Nora to the modest hotel at the edge of town, securing a room with 2 beds and a view of the street below. Once alone in the room, the enormity of what they'd accomplished and survived seemed to hit them both. Nora sank onto one of the beds, exhaustion finally claiming her composure. It's really over, she whispered, after all this time. Reece remained by the window watching the street. Not quite. Not until Ramsey's behind bars. But we've done it, we've given Marshal Hollister what he needs. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I couldn't have done it without you. He shifted uncomfortably under her gratitude. You would have found a way, you're stronger than you know. Nora rose and crossed to him, taking his hand. Perhaps, but I'm glad it was you by my side. The simple touch of her hand in his felt simultaneously foreign and familiar. For 3 years, Reece had avoided human connection, convinced it would only lead to loss. Yet here, standing in this small hotel room with this remarkable woman, the walls he'd built around himself felt flimsy and unnecessary. What happens after, he asked quietly, when this is truly over? I don't know, she admitted. I haven't thought beyond justice for my father. You could go back east, proper society. She studied his face thoughtfully. Is that what you think I want? Isn't it? A comfortable life, security, respectability, all the things the frontier lacks.
Those things have value, she acknowledged, but so does courage, honesty, standing for what's right regardless of the cost. Her eyes held his. I've seen more of those qualities out here than in all the drawing rooms of Boston. The certainty in her voice moved something within him. And where will you find them now? When this is finished. I believe, she said softly, they might be found in a small cabin 15 miles outside Silverton, if its owner were amenable to company. Reese's breath caught at the implications of her words. That cabin is isolated, rough, no place for a judge's daughter. Perhaps it's exactly the place for this judge's daughter. Nora's hand rose to his cheek, unless its owner truly prefers his solitude. The question hung between them, whether his isolation had been a choice or a prison, whether he had the courage to risk caring again. It would need improvements, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. A proper garden, curtains maybe. Her smile bloomed slowly, radiant with promise. I've always had a talent for growing things. And I can sew passably well. It wouldn't be an easy life. Few worthwhile things are easy, she countered, and it would be a life shared that counts for something. As he drew her close, Reece felt the final walls around his heart crumble. It counts for everything, he whispered against her hair. 3 days later, a telegram arrived at the hotel, RAMSEY in custody, federal CHARGES filed, safe to return, HOLLISTER. They rode back to Reese's cabin, their cabin now under clear autumn skies. Scout and the mare moved at an unhurried pace, as if sensing this journey was different from their desperate flight days earlier. The small homestead came into view as they crested the final rise, its simple lines and weathered wood transformed in Reese's eyes. What had been merely shelter now held the promise of home. As they dismounted in the yard, Nora surveyed her new surroundings with appreciative eyes. It needs a woman's touch, she observed, but the bones are good. Reece watched her, still marveling at the unexpected turn his life had taken. We can be married in Silverton next week, if you're certain. She turned to him, her expression serious despite the joy in her eyes. I've never been more certain of anything, but are you? This changes everything you've built. Everything I built was incomplete, he replied, drawing her into his arms. I thought isolation was safety, but it was just another kind of death. You showed me that. As the autumn sun warmed their embrace, Reece finally understood what he'd been missing all these years. The frontier wasn't just a place of hardship and survival, it was also a place of possibility, of second chances, of building something meaningful from the raw materials of courage and hope. And as Nora's lips met his, sealing promises that would carry them through the seasons ahead, Reece Daniels knew he had found his true north at last.